Hey class, welcome back to EDUC 3233. Sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful and wanted to make sure I got the right course. Teaching multiple courses this semester, but hopefully everyone's doing well. We're now moving into our second week of the course, and this will be the first lecture of this second week. And we're still continuing to focus on development, but now we're going to look at kind of the major stages of development that are taking place, really from birth all the way until about adolescence. So we can look at it in four distinct periods. We're looking at early childhood, roughly 2 to 6. So those early elementary, maybe preschool to early elementary, middle childhood, the rest of elementary, early adolescence, maybe kind of wrapping up elementary, getting into middle school, maybe even getting into high school if we're talking about maybe a freshman towards the end. And then by late adolescence, we're talking about, those high school, those secondary years. And again, these are kind of rough estimates, but this is kind of the time period that we're talking about, and some of the differences and things that you might notice among children at these different stages. Early childhood is typically marked when kids are capable of engaging in more fantasy and pretend play. They're able to take on the perspective of other people, perhaps, and this is when it shows they're developing what's known as a theory of mind. They're able to see outside of their own perspective and maybe try to imagine what it's like to be, I don't know, a race car driver, or they play house and one kid gets to be the mom and the dad and the other gets to be the kids, and they get to pretend and play. So they're really not only showing, changes in socialization, but also changes in cognitive structure, the way they think. They're better able to self-regulate. Kids, obviously, if you have young children yourself, you know this to be true. I mean, they have some skills at self-regulating, but still need a lot of help. And they're also starting to understand differences, especially when it comes to identity, along the lines of things like race, gender, ethnicity, things that kind of perceive differences in other people. They're able to kind of notice those things and understand that, oh, yeah, I mean, not everybody has the same skin color as me, or not everybody comes from the same background as me. I'm a boy, and not everybody else is a boy. Things like that. They're starting to kind of develop more understanding of that social kind of composition. By middle childhood, again, 6 to 10 years roughly, more play, but they're also capable of more logical reasoning, mathematical, scientific thinking, at least on a limited basis. They're better understanding of expectations and responsibilities. So that self-regulation, not only do they have more self-regulation, but parents and teachers might even give them more responsibilities, and things like maybe a 10-year-old at home might look after their baby brother or sister for while mom is in the getting ready for dinner or something. Mom's making dinner, and they allow the child to watch the other child because, hey, you're capable of doing these things. Peers become more important. Really, it's interesting that for maybe the first 5 or so years of our life before we go to school, the primary agent of socialization is your parents, your caregivers, the ones who you spend the most time with. But once kids start going into school and spending more and more time with other kids their age, classmates, friends, etc., that peer influence becomes much more important. There's also developing awareness, kind of how you fit in with those peers. There's more peer comparisons taking place. And then at this point, kids are really immersed in learning. They're doing a lot of learning as far as elementary school. They're still learning things maybe at home, responsibilities, chores, sports, things like that. And it tends to be best when they are learning something that's familiar to them. So teachers being able to maybe connect what students already know to something new that they're learning can be really beneficial. Early adolescence, this is the period where we're talking about puberty. So a lot of physical development is taking place. The body is becoming more physically mature to begin the process of sexual maturation, meaning the capability of producing children. Now, obviously, we don't want 10 to 14-year-olds producing children. We have laws against that. And we really, we want kids to be kids, but that's physically, at least what's happening is the body is preparing itself. It's the body coming into its adult self. Children are more capable at this point of engaging in abstract thought, which we talked about in the previous lecture about Piaget. They're developing much more interpersonal connections, maybe even early signs of romantic relationships, but definitely connections with platonic, with friends and things like that. There's probably a greater sense of autonomy, making choices for themselves. And then this is a time where, because identity formation is starting to happen in adolescence, so academics can be kind of precarious. You can see some students who really identify with schoolwork and enjoy it. Others maybe not so much. Some people see themselves as a successful student, others do not. And that time is really critical for identity formation, kind of figuring out what role does learning have in your life. And then late adolescence, roughly 14 to 18. So ending out childhood into adulthood. Again, greater sense of autonomy. This is the time where maybe kids are making decisions, big life decisions like, hey, do I want to go to college? Well, if I want to go to college, do I want to go out of state? Do I want to stay in state? What do I want to major in? A lot of choices, a lot of decisions are coming up. More the importance of social relationships continue. In fact, I mean, this is a time period where maybe you're making the kind of relationships that last throughout your lifetime. Maybe you can think back to some of the friends you're closest with, and they might be people that you met during this formative period of your life. And then, even though we talk about development ending, we're ending it here, at least for the discussion of development. There is still a lot of development taking place between the years, physically, emotionally, morally. A lot of development is taking place. One of the big things that's taking place, at least cognitive, is the development of the brain physically and cognitively. As the brain changes and develops and becomes more dense with neural connections, we're going to see a lot of the change. A lot of the change in cognition is reflected by this change in the parts of the brain, specifically the lobes of the brain. The frontal lobe specifically is the part of the brain that really allows us to make more complex, higher, make more decisions. And so this is kind of like, we talk about puberty ending, during your teenage years, but really this process of the brain maturing from adolescence really doesn't stop until even our mid 20s. And we get better at kind of thinking through our choices as they're happening, as that part of the brain develops. So, just something to think about as we close out this section about development and the different stages. Think about what is one trend that you will inform how you work with your respective group of students. So, if, for example, you're going to be, and this doesn't even mean if you're a teacher, you might be in a position where you interact with adolescents often, or maybe younger kids. Try to think about how is knowing about that specific group and kind of their developmental trajectories, how can that be of benefit to you? So, we're going to stop here. I'm going to stop sharing. That's going to be it for this week, or this lecture, I should say. I have one more for this particular week, and I'll see you all on the other side for that next lecture. Take care. Bye.